I think when we're looking at something chronic, though, it's a multidimensional problem. It has to be treated on a multidimensional level.
Yeah.
So if you just go and take some supplements, it's not going to work because you haven't addressed why you've let yourself get chronic fatigue.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, without sounding mean, it is the individual's responsibility that they have this thing. And then you also need to look at it kind of on a spiritual level, like, you know, what is this trying to teach you? Like, what's the lesson here, you know? And I could not profess to answer that because that's someone's personal journey, but I think all of these things teach us something. And I know for me, like, you know, I'm grateful for all of the really yucky stuff I had to go through because I don't think I'd be me if it wasn't for that.
So welcome on the show, Tahnee.
Hi, Sebastian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks
My
for making
pleasure.
time. So how on earth did you get in to health and all the other wonderful things that enable you to just dissect actually what's going on in wellness and in the health movement and give it a little bit of a different perspective?
That's a long story and a short story. I'll probably go the abridged version. My mother was very into kind of herbs and what you might call like 80s, 90s health, so lentils and, you know, vegetarianism and these things. And through her, I discovered yoga and started practicing around 15 and kind of discovered naturopathy around 16 and was seeing naturopaths and healers during that time. I had an eating disorder and I also had kind of a lot of emotions that I didn't know what to do with. And I think my body was really reflecting that. So I would have regular UTIs and kind of issues with my digestion when I could eat and those kinds of things. And so I always felt like I was very much teetering on the edge of not being very well. And I was always looking for some answers and I was looking anywhere I could find them. So I did try Western medicine and I was told I was depressed and put on antidepressants, which didn't resonate with me at all. I then started seeing a naturopath who told me to go for a walk every day and get some sunshine. And, you know, it was funny, but it sounds like a stupid thing, but it was so empowering for me to sort of start to take control over myself and my health. And, you know, we also worked with herbs and with diets and various things. And, you know, it was a period of time, probably into my 20s, I sort of finally kicked my eating disorder and was more into yoga and but I always continued to have digestive issues just constantly. I would have bloating or I would just feel like I couldn't eat certain things, or if I ate certain things I'd have diarrhea or constipation. It was just back and forth. And I used to start to get like sinusitis at certain times of the year, like sneezing and kind of all this stuff. And you know, I kind of just kept feeling like it wasn't right. I was like, something's not right and I can't find the right answer and nobody's really like, I'm kind of getting a little bit better every time I pay all this money to see somebody, but I'm never really getting there. And I've always been very curious. I've always been kind of someone who's happy to teach myself. So I think those things all started to kind of happen around the same time where I realized I was probably going to have to take responsibility for it myself and try and work out what was at the root of it. And through that, I discovered that it was a lot to do with what was going on in my head and my emotions and what I was thinking and how I was relating to the world. And so I started to see a therapist and, you know, kept practicing yoga and kept doing these things. And I could never meditate. I couldn't sit still. I was anxious. I was having these kind of little nervous breakdowns all the time because I was, you know, doing so much and always stressed. And, you know, I think it all kind of started to work itself out when I did my first teacher training. I realized that I was very much abusing myself. Through the guise of health, through the lens of health. So a lot of the things I talk about are from self-experience, you know, like fad diet things that were supposed to be healthy, you know, like fasts and cleanses and, you know, always chasing this next thing that was going to finally give me the perfect health that was missing from my life, you know. And what I came to realize through, you know, some sucky times, learning to meditate, you know, was that, actually, no, like, you really just need to like eat 3 times a day and like get some sleep and go in the sun every day and like breathe fresh air and don't think too much about what you're eating. And, you know, because I was, you know, this constant loop in my head. It never turned off, this voice, you know, about everything I was doing. You know, am I exercising enough? Am I eating enough? Am I sleeping enough? Am I, you know, no. And so, yeah, I came through all of that actually being taught by this really beautiful woman. I had been practicing yoga at this point for probably 10 years and she laid me down on a bed and she said, feel your body. And I said, I am feeling my body. And she said, no, you're not feeling your body. You're not inside your body. And I was like, what do you mean? Of course I'm inside my body. And she's like, no, you're up here. And she was like pointing above my head. And I was like, no, I'm not. And she said, you are. And she went down to my feet and she held my feet for a while. And I started to feel myself kind of slipping inside of myself. And I'd never felt that before in my life. And I was like, holy shit, I'm like inside of myself. And I was like, this is like really uncomfortable. Like I actually hated it. Like I was like, I don't like being in here, you know? And I think I was always trying to be outside of myself to be this better, more perfect, more different version of myself, you know? I think, you know, I haven't, you know, I don't really want to psychoanalyze it. It was just, it was what it was and it is what it is, you know? But I kept seeing this woman weekly at first and I learned to do that on my own. And then, you know, over time I started to see her monthly and we did some therapy together and stuff. And anyway, all that time I was studying and reading and like exploring. I started seeing Chinese doctors and they were like this epiphany for me because it wasn't like I was broken. It was just that things were a bit out of whack and it could just be brought back into alignment, you know, like all very simple stuff. And, you know, there wasn't a lot of talking. It was just some needles and some herbs and things started to change and my period came back and my acne went away and all of these things, you know. So, you know, long story and I'm still keeping it short really, but I kind of found that the Taoist ideas, when I looked at them through the lens of the yogic ideas that I'd learned, were very, very similar, but Taoism was a much simpler way of looking at it. Yoga's shrouded in all of this interpretation and kind of westernization, and Taoism really has been preserved in a different way. So I find it just because it wasn't trendy, you know, it didn't get taken to America, it didn't get, you know, capitalized and corporatized and all these things. So I use a lot of Taoist philosophy and then a lot of yogic practices. And then, you know, they kind of form the basis of how I try and live and then where I work from and teach from and everything. And then I met Mason, my partner, trying to explore herbalism and plant kind of consciousness because I believe that herbs have a purpose and they're here to support us and probably save us because we need it. And so that was really the final piece for me when I found reishi and heshiwu in particular, these two herbs I started taking, and which I now know, you know, really support liver and blood, which were two organs of mine that were really struggling, like the blood being kind of an energetic frequency in the body, not just literally blood, and also the liver being this kind of you know, this ability for ourselves to manifest fully into this life, you know, if you think about springtime and like plants erupting, you know, and meeting the sun with their leaves exposed and like ready for the next, you know, cycle, like I was constantly suppressing myself because I was afraid of being me, you know. So I think I had this big epiphany, kind of kept rolling, and I don't know, here we are. I'm super like lucky that I think all of that stuff coalesced to me meeting my partner and we got to have a baby and now we have a great business and I get to do my yoga things and yeah, it's all kind of like really nice. And in there I got to study this thing called Chin Sung, which is kind of, that came out of my relationship with my belly because I had always judged my stomach, you know. It was like, and if you think about it again from like this Chinese perspective, we digest everything we're exposed to. So all the information we assume and consume, you know, all the people we meet, every emotion we feel, it has to be digested somewhere. And it has to be digested through our body, through our organs. And I just don't think I'd appreciated how sensitive I was and how I wasn't able to digest stuff, you know, and I was exposing myself constantly to people. I had a hospitality job when I was younger and then a yoga teaching job. You know, I was always working a lot, so I didn't give myself a lot of time to rest and recover. And so, you know, I was not giving myself time to digest and process. And so once I learned about my organs and how they worked and their function, I learned to touch my own body and then other people's bodies. It kind of all started to make a lot of sense to me that really the root of our health is in our abdomen. You know, it's kind of in this place between our sternum and our pelvic area, like our pubic bone, and navel is where we process all of our trauma from our families and from our lifetimes. And so, yeah, when we start to put on padding there, when we start to kind of feel that these organs are not functioning well, it's probably because there's something bigger going on than just, you know, we're not digesting our food. So that was kind of these like three real things, you know. It's this philosophy of Taoism and yoga, the practice, the actual physical practice of meditation and asana and breathing, and then, you know, the massage, the Taoist healing practices that I've studied. A lot of them are sexual cultivation. We talked a little bit about that before we came on, but, you know, for women there are practices and for men And then the herbs, and they, if you look at Chinese medicine as a healing art, it says there are 6 things people need. They need community, they need food, like good food. Dietary therapy is the first place you always start. But their version of dietary therapy is like warm, mushy soups and like, slow cooked things and like, things you cook in a cauldron over a fire for a long time. It's not like cold green juices and raw salads and, it's like you nourish. It's like when you're convalescing, when someone's ill, you don't go and feed them a salad, you feed them like a soup or a broth, and that's what they say. If anyone's a bit out of whack, they should be having those kinds of things, And then, you want to look at manual therapies. So you're going to look at massage, acupuncture, those kinds of things. What have I covered? I'm missing a couple. And then you're going to look at like their psychological health as well, emotions and that kind of thing. How many have I got to? 4?
4, yeah.
Community food. Yeah, and then
manual therapy, psychology.
And then their physical kind of like practices, energy cultivations, so things like qigong, tai chi, walking. Like every tradition says you should walk every day, which is so simple and less like, we've got to like go to the gym or do this or do that. It's like, well, humans are designed to walk. Like it moves our entire body, it moves our digestive system, it gets our heart beating, we breathe air. Like it's pretty much the perfect form of exercise, but we don't do it. And then number 6 is something like a meditation or a kind of a
mindfulness.
Like a mindfulness practice of some kind where, and it doesn't have to be a formal sitting practice, but if you look at a lot of the Zen traditions, certainly the work becomes a meditation. It's like you do your duty with that mindful attention. Chop wood, carry water is a very famous Zen koan, and it's about, showing up every day for your daily tasks with that sacredness, And we miss that a lot in our culture. Nothing's sacred anymore, It's like we're just constantly on the go and we forget to slow down and eat. We forget to look at the person we're talking to, we forget to be present with our children. And so I think, it's this really important kind of combination of things that kind of can create health. And I think it's super important that we define that for ourselves. We don't look to anyone else to give us a definition of what our version of health is, And I know for me, it's like if I'm waking up and feeling shit every morning, then I need to change something, and it's on me to do that. It's not on, I'm not going to go find it in a book or on the internet or, or in another herb, like I get that all the time. People write to us and they say, I'm super tired, like what herb can I take? And it's like, well, are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough rest? Like sleep isn't rest, and I think we miss that. It's like sleep's actually a metabolic process. Your brain and your body are going through amazing transformation in that time. If you believe in the yogic and Taoist traditions, your soul is having a journey through the astral realm at that time. It's like if you're not getting that time, you're missing out on a lot of really important kind of stuff that's meant to be, metabolizing in your body, emotions and thoughts, as well as physically, all the different things that, the liver needs to create bile, clean the blood, all of this kind of stuff at nighttime. The brain gets cleared, like the immune system of the brain starts to purge everything out while we sleep. And, we look at things like Alzheimer's and stuff, which are rampant now. And it's like that came out of this industrial time where people were just working all the time. Like, I think a lot of the people now in their kind of 60s and stuff, they were the first generation to really just work like all the time, like they had really poor work-life balance, and we're continuing that. I think it's getting better. I hope it's getting better. But so I think this is the thing. Sleep is great and we need it, and then we also need rest. We need pockets of time in our day where we aren't thinking, where we aren't doing, where we aren't consuming a podcast or media of some kind, which is actually stimulating our brains and taking us on another journey, It's like quiet time in nature with a cup of tea or whatever it looks like for you, but it needs to be still, and you need to be not processing anything that is stimulating to your body. So.
Wow, there was so much in there.
Okay.
So, no, that's awesome.
I ranted.
No, that's really awesome. And I think...
Stay close.
No, all good. The first thing I just wanted to clarify is, so when you say we digest our thoughts, do we have a concept of how that actually, on a physical level, like how does that actually get into our gut from a thought in a head?
Mm-hmm. So if everything is vibration or a frequency of some kind, we have to imagine that if we were to think a certain thing, I'll go back a little bit. In Taoism, each organ is correlated to an emotion, and its job is to process that emotion or to be responsible for that emotion. So the liver's is anger, the heart is joy, the spleen is thinking, and anxiety, worry is kind of a sign of that being out of balance. the kidneys is fear,
Yeah.
and the lungs is grief, or that ability to kind of perceive the poignancy of life, like that bittersweet kind of like everything. There's that beautiful, another Zen saying, like this Zen monk was holding a cup, and his student was saying, oh, like, you know, you're attached to that cup, you know, how can you be a monk if you're attached to that cup? And he's like, it's my favorite cup. And the student was like, well, you're not really a monk, you know. And he said, well, in my mind, it's already broken, you know. And it's this idea that we can love something, but also know that it's going to die, you know, that it's going to be gone one day. And so many of us are afraid of that. And so that's the lungs. And so when we look at these kind of organ systems as being responsible, it takes it out of this Western idea of the brain does everything, and it's this idea that the body does everything. And so each part of the body needs to work with each other to support. So what can happen is if we think all day, our spleen gets tired, and then we dump a bunch of food on it, you know. And I know for you, like I was telling you, I think you have a damp spleen, you know, and it's like your job is to be analytical all day. Like it's a huge toll on your body. And then you go home and you're probably hungry because you haven't probably eaten that well during the day and whatever, and you eat a big meal and then you go to bed. And so you've basically gone, you know, all day long I'm going to make you digest something on an energetic level, and then all night long I'm going to make you digest something on a physical level, and you don't get any time to rest, right? Because you get up and do it all again the next day, because we all do. This is life, you know. And so what is interesting is, like, how do we allow these different, you know, the Chinese medicine kind of energy clock is super interesting to talk about. And, you know, I can probably, you'd even be better to have Jost on the podcast. He was just on our podcast. He's amazing.
Yeah, he is actually coming.
Yeah. So talk to him about that. But
okay.
what I'll give you a brief overview. What he says is that, or what Chinese medicine says, and yoga, it says at different times of the day, different functions are operating. And I know you've worked a lot with Roger Hamilton's work, and he has a very similar thing. He's like, on Mondays do steel work, and on Tuesday do da-da-da. And it's this idea that at different times of the day, it's appropriate to do different types of activities. So it says that early in the morning, we should do something kind of meditative, like, and this is early, you know, like 5 a.m.-ish. And then we hit our large intestine time, and we're supposed to do a poo. And that's like, humans are supposed to wake up and do a poo in the morning. That's the thing. You empty it out, and then you start again. And then most people don't do that. And then, you know, a little bit later in the day, you start to hit the stomach and spleen time. That's when you're supposed to eat some breakfast, you know. And then as the day goes around, it gets more yang, more active. So the morning time into early afternoon is really good for doing activities, thinking, getting shit done, kind of a thing. And you're going to do your best thinking in the morning. I mean, everybody feels that, you know, those, like, I know, like for me, if I get into work early and I just pump it out, I do my best writing, my best thinking, it's all stomach spleen time, it's all thinking time, it's all an analytical time. And, you know, but if we keep doing that all day, that energy is having to dominate that day, and all the other organs don't get their time as well. And it sort of just creates this mashup of shitty energy in the body. It's called stagnant chi, or it can be, you know, toxic even chi sometimes. So what happens is later in the day, we're meant to enter this wisdom time when we're meant to integrate the learnings of the day. And most of us don't do that. And we go home and we get busy and we have kids and we go da-da-da-da-da, and there's no time for reflection or quiet and spirit and, you know, just kind of being in this sense of, like, you know, gratitude as well for the day. Sorry, I keep leaning away. And that's where, if you look at, you know, what happens with the kidneys, a lot of that's driven by fear and this idea of scarcity. If I don't do more, I'm not going to get somewhere. Or, you know, it's this kind of really strong energy in our culture that, like, I'm only worth something if I'm doing something, if I'm creating something, if I'm making something, if I'm putting something out there, shipping something, you know. And so we don't give power to these times that are just around, you know, not doing anything, that are actually around us allowing that stuff to sort of simmer in and, like, stew and kind of, you know, kidney's all about water. It's this subversive underwater kind of, like, the subconscious. It's the stuff that kind of everything else manifests from. And if you look at it in terms of, like, a seasonal cycle, it's winter, where everything conserves its energy, everything draws back in and it prepares for the next spring, right? And if we don't have that time, then, you know, we're just going to come to springtime still running on our last cycle, and we're going to be exhausted. And so we see this all the time at SuperFeast. I see it all the time at yoga. People are deficient in their kidney energy, which is effectively adrenal sort of problems, which leads to hormonal issues, which leads to all sorts of stuff. It will lead to digestive issues because the kidneys provide the heat to the digestion, for the digestion to start to burn through the food we consume. So it's kind of like this snowball effect. And so this is just coming because we haven't honoured you know, our own circadian rhythm, our own daily cycles. And there's lots of biohackers talking about this, and they talk about putting on red things at the end of the day and doing this stuff. And, you know, I don't disagree with that stuff. I think it can be really helpful, especially if you do shift work or it's tough for you to kind of honor your own rhythms because of your circumstances. It happens. Like, we all have to do stuff sometimes that's out of alignment. But, you know, it's like, if you're doing that at the expense of having rest time and time to really be still and to allow all your efforts to kind of just, you know, be appreciated, like to express some gratitude, then it's really tough. And then ideally we go to bed around 9 or 10, which again, who does that? You know, so it's quite rare. Like, I don't know many people my age that are getting to bed that early. And then, you know, we're meant to have a lot of sleep around 11 to kind of 3. We're meant to be, you know, the gallbladder and liver are meant to be cleansing the blood and kind of getting us ready for the next day. And that's where a lot of people will find they get, like, you know, quite unwell, and it's like their liver function's not working well. It's like, well, have a look at your sleep. Are you getting really good sleep through those hours? Because a lot of the time people aren't, and that's partly why is because they're not having enough rest during the daytime, they're doing too much, and then, you know, by that time the liver function is just not there for them to really be able to cleanse the blood and get everything ready for the next day. So, you know, this is just one way of looking at things, obviously, but I think we don't really... You know, we don't talk about this stuff enough. We don't talk about what an actual capacity is, you know. It's like everyone's just expected to take on more take on more.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, I mean, at school you just learn how to function and to produce and to, you know, all of that, all the mind stuff. There's no balance between, like, actually, you know, as you said, like, what is actually the capacity? And the capacity probably changes between seasons, between age, all of that of a person.
Exactly, and that's what we don't talk about as well. Like, a woman after a child needs way more rest and time to restore. She's lost blood, she's lost energy, you know, she's going to feel like she needs to keep up because she's kept up her whole life, and it's really important that as a culture we say it's okay to rest, you know, and we need as a culture to support that. It's the same with men, you know, you guys... Especially men with families, they work very, very, very hard during their younger years, and then they hit an older point and everything just starts to fall apart, and they get, you know, they don't want to stop work because it's the only thing they've known. It's like, we need to support our men. We need to make sure that they have fairly balanced lives, that they have things outside of their work, that they're not just expected to be breadwinners, you know. And it's difficult. I understand that this is a kind of bougie place to speak from sometimes. You know, I own a business and I can create my own life to some degree, but I think if we don't have these conversations, it's super difficult for things to change. And I think with our children, you know, we're fortunate to live in an area where Steiner education is an option, and the kids are encouraged for their first, you know, until they're at least 8, to really just be outdoors and playing and, you know, in a fantasy land, and they're not learning to be little cogs in a machine. And I think that's important, you know, like, I don't want my daughter sitting in a chair for, you know, 8 hours a day for the first 5 years of her life. Like, I think that's nuts, you know, like, it blows my mind that we think that's okay. You know, and I don't want to sound like a punk and a rebel, because I think I understand, you know, the culture and what we need to all do to stay alive. Like, I get both sides of it. But, you know, if we don't start thinking about these things and even asking ourselves, you know, what can we do? You know, then it starts to snowball. And I think, you know, it comes back to, if there are chronic health issues going on in a family, you know, it's like, well, you know, what do we really need? You know, do you need a bigger house and a better car and more clothes and more shit? You know, probably not. You know, can you really, like, afford to take some time out and rest so that you can take care of your health first, and then, you know, look at what your capacity is, what can I add in? And, you know, like you said about seasonality, like, when I was 20, what I could do to now at 34 is totally different. But I managed to burn myself out like at least 4 times in my 20s, you know, because I was doing like 6 jobs and buying a house at 20 and being an idiot, you know, like just on my little treadmill, you know, on my hamster wheel. So I think, as we age, especially, we get wisdom, which is one of the gifts of age. But it's nice if younger people start to think about this stuff too, I think.
And I think there is a movement overall that people actually don't want to work full time. They're actually okay to earn a little bit less, or, you know, just have that flexibility. And it's way more important nowadays than it ever used to be. And, you know, it's a societal sort of thing, like the society just shifts that way. But like, from your, like, if you think about it practically, like, nowadays, what can you do? Like, you know, we're still at a point where people are expected to work 7.5 hours. So that, you know, like, is there an option to just like do the heavy work in the morning, and then, you know, there are some tasks that are more shuffling paper, but, you know, like more mechanical or something like that, and just dim it down and not be full on all day long.
So the advice is generally, like, if you can't totally like live your life by the Taoist schedule, which, you know, to the reality of their lives, they were agrarian farmers. Like a lot of them, the reason they had a medical system like acupuncture was they were in the fields farming all day to feed everybody because they had food issues and, you know, there was a supply issue and all that kind of stuff. So they were having back issues and, you know, there was stuff going on in their culture. They had basically water invasion, it's called, from being in the rice paddies all day. So acupuncture was used to get water out of their bodies. Herbs were used to get water out of their bodies. You know, they had different needs to us. But these ideas come from people who did take themselves out of society and observe nature's cycles. They were just observing things. They were scientists in a sense that they weren't trying to, you know, put an expectation on something. They were just watching what happened when you took out all the external stimulus. And this is what happens. We are animals. We have a circadian rhythm. We have and you know, if you look at a human in a more kind of traditional culture, in the mornings, they're usually quite active. You know, I go to Bali and everyone's up before dawn, they're cleaning and they're sweeping and they're carrying on, and then everyone kind of chills out around lunchtime, has a bit of a nap, and then, you know, they kind of go a bit until the sort of, it's not that late. They're usually in bed pretty early. Like, I mean, I remember staying in little villages and it's like at 8 o'clock there's nobody around and everyone's in their rooms, you know. And that's kind of really like how we're meant to live. And I know we have Netflix now, so God knows. But, you know, I think what I try to do is, like, first of all, we have a business, so we've made it a culture that we work from 9:30 to 4:30 with a half-hour break away from your desk, and you one day at home a week, and you have to work those hours. You can't work longer. We don't have overtime. It doesn't exist, and we don't expect it. So that's something we've done to make sure that we can set a culture standard, I suppose, in our business. Personally, I'll try and do stuff that requires me to be mentally kind of cognizant earlier in the day, and then toward the end of the day, like you said, it's the paper shuffling stuff. It's like, you know, I'll do challenging emails early and then less challenging ones later, or I'll do stuff that I don't have to really kind of think about later in the day. If I have an accountant meeting, I have it early, you know, because I know my brain's sharper then. And then I don't do much in the afternoon, you know, and I've really come to, like, I give myself a lot more of a break than I used to. And sometimes I feel lazy, you know, and I was talking to a friend about this morning. She's got a growing business and, you know, she's working 70-hour weeks and she's got 2 kids. And it's like, you know, but her kids miss her at dinner, you know. And I said, well, you know, at the end of the day, like, what's going to be more important to you in 20 years? Is like that you were at dinner with your kids or you were at the office till 7 at night, you know. And I think for me, like, I'd rather be with my daughter. Like, I'd rather she saw me through her childhood than I had a very successful business. And it's funny though, like, the flip side of that is our business is growing more the less I do, which I'm still getting my head around. But, you know, it's because I think we make ourselves important. And it's this kind of almost an ego trip where we think we're indispensable to the world. And then when we step back, we realize that the world doesn't need us. So it just keeps on turning. And really, we can just dip in and out and contribute when it's appropriate. And, you know, that's been for me a big, you know, it's certainly a big part of my makeup is work makes me valuable. I was speaking to a girl the other night. She's like, I work, you know, 12-hour days and then I go out every night drinking and then I'm studying this course so I can get a visa to stay here. And I thought, well, and she's like, I'm just exhausted all the time. What herb should I take? And I was like, well, I'd hate to say, but I think you should, like, not go out every night and have a rest, you know? Like, you're on your feet all day as a hairdresser around chemicals. Like, that's a big job and your body needs time to process that. So, you know, I think we can all just remember that, you know, what we think is really going on is often our own mind's perception. You know, like, I couldn't possibly have a day at home. It's like, well, you're just saying that because you're limited by your beliefs. You know, you haven't actually asked your boss. If you've asked your boss and he said no, then we're having a different conversation. You know, but if you haven't asked, if you haven't inquired, if you haven't spent some time thinking, well, what would really help me best manage my health right now? I have another friend who's an Ayurvedic doctor, and she worked with a lot of lawyers because she was in, I think, Boston or somewhere where there's a, you know, big law community and they kind of word got around that she was really good. And these are women that work, you know, easily 70, 80-hour weeks, you know, crazy and high stress and high pay, you know, and it's hard to walk away from that. It's hard to walk away from the prestige and from being, you know, someone in a community. And and a lot of them found that after a few years of seeing her that was what was required, that they had to sort of take a bit of a step back. They worked 3 days a week and they had a farm, like a community, a house in a community that was out of town where they could be a bit more in nature, and, you know, that was what they had to do. And I think we're all afraid to do less. We're all afraid to have less because we're in this culture of keeping up with the Joneses and social media and, you know, oh, well, Bob has, you know, a new car and I need a new car or whatever it is. I think it's on a micro and a macro level. So I think on a really practical level, it takes the first us to just ask ourselves what we need. And then, you know, I think we can support ourselves with diet. Like the Chinese way is dietary therapy first, which means easy to digest foods, which means foods that are generally cooked and warm and, you know, like a hug, like soups, nourishing broths, well-cooked vegetables, well-cooked meats, like slow-cooked. If you're going to eat grains, well-cooked grains, soaked grains, prepared, you know, more traditional manner. I think those kinds of things are super nourishing for us. I think then, you know, making sure we're well hydrated is obviously essential. You know, you can definitely use herbs, and we use herbs tonically. So that means we take them with the intention of preserving our health and longevity as opposed to fixing something that's wrong. Yeah. So I don't ever think about my body being broken. I think about what needs the support most right now. So I have a 3-year-old, and sometimes she's home from school. Like we had a bushfire in town this week and I had to be on a Tuesday where she's normally at daycare. I had to be home with her. And, you know, I could have been really stressed out about that. I could have been going, oh my God, I have all this stuff to do and I had these appointments and I can't get anything done. But instead I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be here with my child today. And I know it's going to be a big week. So I'm going to make sure I'm taking some adrenal herbs and some herbs that are supporting me because I'm going to have to do a couple of extra longer days, you know, to make up for today. And that's just what happens, you know. And so I just make sure that I'm nourishing myself as opposed to trying to put a Band-Aid on some symptom or fix something. Yeah. And it's a lot around prevention, like catching ourselves before we fall down, you know, catching ourselves before we get so exhausted that we're cranky at our partners or, you know, can't go to work or, you know, because that's what I see a lot. People kind of wait till they've got chronic fatigue or wait till they've got some kind of really terrible tumor or something. And it's like, well, you know, we need to catch that stuff earlier. Yeah.
So I think what I hear from you is that definitely the lifestyle and the way we live is number one. It's really sort of the foundation of, you know, the ground that we're treating on. And if we design it in a way that is actually really uneven and really difficult, sooner or later we will get bodily problems. And they're great tips that you were just pointing out. So let's say someone has chronic fatigue now, you know, and they actually have problems there and you know, one of the first things probably that would be suggested is take it easy, you know, actually stay back, sleep, right? Yeah, exactly. I've heard that before. Someone said, like, you just have to sleep for 3 days straight and it might actually be
Well, I've heard
better.
3 months, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
I've worked with some doctors and that, like Chinese doctors, and they say their best prescription for chronic fatigue is that person stays in bed and sleeps as much as they can until it's healed, basically. Yeah. You know, I think that the reality of that, of course, is challenging, and I know that. I'm definitely not against herbs, supplements, all these things. I think it's super important. I think when we're looking at something chronic, though, it's a multidimensional problem. It has to be treated on a multidimensional level. So if you just go and take some supplements, it's not going to work because you haven't addressed why you've let yourself get chronic fatigue. And at the end of the day, without sounding mean, it is the individual's responsibility that they have this thing. And then you also need to look at it kind of on a spiritual level, like, you know, what is this trying to teach you? Like, what's the lesson here, you know? And I could not profess to answer that because that's someone's personal journey, but I think all of these things teach us something. And I know for me, like, you know, I'm grateful for all of the really yucky stuff I had to go through because I don't think I'd be me if it wasn't for that. And, you know, I just have a goal of being a really cool old lady. And so I just, all of these little things that I jump over and the hurdles and the problems are like, they're part of my tapestry, you know, they're going to turn me hopefully into a cool old lady, maybe a cranky old lady, we'll see. But, you know, I just, they're my story, they're what weave me, you know, and I think we don't, when we go see a doctor or a naturopath even a lot of the time, they go, oh, here's a pile of herbs and here's some supplements, and they don't really have that bedside manner and that ability to talk and to really listen and to, you know, to go, all right, what's really going on? Like one of the things I was taught was to listen, you know, in Chinese medicine, you're supposed to ask 10,000 questions and you're supposed to listen to the answers, you know, because the person will tell you what's wrong with them. And at the end of the day, if I sit here for half an hour with you and just ask questions and listen, you're going to tell me the root cause of everything that's going on. And it's not going to be, I'm not having enough vitamin C or whatever. It's going to be like, do you know what? I'm really worried about, you know, like chronic fatigue is often, you know, a pretty big emotional component, and it's often, you know, again, I'm painting broad strokes, but, you know, it's often to do with self-worth and, you know, kind of feeling like everything's on that person's shoulders, and you know that's their only way out is to have chronic fatigue.
Okay.
It's like I can't escape from my life in any other way but to get very, very sick.
Right.
You know?
So that's a tendency you see when people.
It's a pattern.
Yeah, it's a pattern.
And I don't want to paint broad strokes.
Yeah. But so overall, like, what would these people do? Like, let's say, you know, there's a high tendency, or high possibility that these people actually have that, but unconsciously. They might only know that unconsciously and actually not consciously. So how would they actually go about it without going on a 10-year, you know, finding my soul and figuring that out? Is it? I guess there's also feedback from certain plants that you can actually take that would draw it out, because when I listen to you, what you often say is like, what is stored in that organ, which means you can go vice versa. You can either go, not psychotherapy, but, you know, going through the mind back in there and digging it out, or actually supporting the organ so much then it starts to what you were calling digesting it.
So
and
you
then
don't
it comes
need
out
to process it mentally necessarily. You know, like if you took kidney herbs, for example, the fear will be worked on an energetic level. So imagine that chronic fatigue is because this person doesn't know any other way out. So they're afraid that if they keep going, they can't, so they're going to have to collapse to get the rest they need. Let's say that's the pattern. So it's coming from a fear thing. So it might manifest as an adrenal kind of like thing, and you know, usually also has other organs involved. But let's just stick to kidneys to keep it really clear. So we might then take a bunch of kidney herbs. So what they're going to do is they're going to restore some of that kidney energy, which is going to multiply on a multidimensional level into the energy in spiritual bodies, because we can't separate them. It's like there's the great analogy of like water. As a solid, it's water, and then you start to heat it up and change its vibration, it becomes gas. And if you cool it down and slow down its vibration, it becomes ice, right? So we're kind of like ice. We're like slowed down vibration. So when you work on the physical, you're working on the slowest to change vibration. So it's going to take longer. Because you've heard of spontaneous healing, right? You've heard of people that have an epiphany and they're healed. That's because they accessed the gas level. They were at like the spirit level. For whatever reason, the stars aligned and bang, 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 they were able to and that's the quickest. It's obviously the hardest, but it's the quickest, But when we're talking about on the ice level, on the hard physical gross level, it takes a long time to change. So what herbs do is they can come in and work on the middle level, on the energy level, which will trickle down to the physical and they will trickle up to the spiritual. And some herbs are special and they can play in the spiritual realm and the physical realm. Reishi is a great example. But, you know, they're kind of operating on this multidimensional level, for sure. And that's why plants with intelligence are important as opposed to, like, mass-produced, like, farm-grown kind of... So we work at SuperFeast with herbs that are grown DDAO, which means they're from their spiritual homeland, which means they have the essence of their kind of natural environment. We've been talking a lot about nature and how important it is for something to stay within its natural... you know, elements and its natural rhythms, and so that's why we source the way we do, because we believe when we ingest that we get some of that power. It's why dietary therapy is important. If you're eating, you know, low vibration dead foods, which are things like, you know, sadly frozen pizzas and all these kinds of things, you know, then you're getting that kind of energy in the body. So it's hard to raise a vibration with that. And when you look at things like plants, you know, that's why veganism, these things have become so popular, because in the short term, people feel incredible because suddenly they're taking in a lot of energy, a lot of chi, and they're bringing in a lot of vitamins and all the other things that come along with that, for sure. But it's a short term, it's like a drug, you know, it's like a short term high, and then you kind of long term, it doesn't work, which I think a lot of people don't realize about, you know, these kind of cold plant-based diets is they only work for a short period of time. They're really good for, you know, if you need to kind of shift weight or like, again, it depends on the type of weight. So, but yeah, they can be really helpful as a cleanse is a simple way of thinking about it. But in terms of a long-term lifestyle, it tends not to be useful because of the things we talked about with the digestion. If you imagine your digestion is a cauldron and you keep throwing cold things in, and all plant foods basically are energetically cold, you know, except for things like potatoes and stuff. If you're putting in like salads and fruits and, you know, mangoes, and you see all these people that they seem great for a few years and then things start to deteriorate. And it depends generally on how strong their core essence is, their jing is. So someone with a lot of jing can kind of kick on with that for quite a long time. Someone who's quite weak constitutionally tends to burn out fast. So you'll see, and I've seen that a lot in social media lately, where there's been, I can think of at least 3 or 4 quite high profile vegans that have come out that they're not vegan anymore because their health's suffering. And you know, they've been vegan for like 5 to 10 years. And so the first bit, it was all sunshine and rainbows and I feel amazing. And then the next bit is all like, oh my God, I'm going to die. I've got all this weird shit going on. And again, from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's just extreme. They've gone from one extreme to another extreme. They've gone from a crappy diet to a crazy like cleansing diet. And the middle ground is like what we were talking about. Slow cooked vegetables. And humans evolved with cooking. Like that's why we have brains like that we have, you know, that's why we're not monkeys. Like this whole process kind of came about through us harnessing fire. There's some great books on this and it's a super interesting thing to think about. And Chinese medicine really emphasizes this. It's like fire is so important to our digestion and to, you know, Ayurveda says it as well, Agni, this digestive fire, this heat, and it's our metabolism, our heat comes from that. If you imagine your digestion is like a cauldron, like a pot, boiling away happily, and that the boiling, the flame of the fuel has to come from somewhere. So it has to come from your spleen yang, the heat of your spleen, which has to come from somewhere, which comes from your kidneys, right? So kidney yang is the source of all heat in the body, source of all yang. And all of our metabolism is fired by the kidneys, effectively. And so what you'll see all the time, and, you know, I'm not trying to shit on vegans, I totally respect the animal rights part of it, and I think that's a really complex conversation for sure, but just in terms of a health perspective, it's like you're basically constantly throwing, you know, cold things. Imagine if you just keep dropping frozen peas into a boiling stew, the temperature goes down, the temperature goes down. You know, we've all pulled, you know, raw pasta into a boiling pot and the boiling stops, right? So anything we pour in there, the body has to bring it up to boiling temperature and then process it. And that's where all of that metabolic, you know, transformation alchemy occurs. Alchemy occurs in fire, you know, and digestion is alchemy. Like how do we take, you know, a cooked potato and turn it into body mass or into blood or into hormones? Like that's a mind fuck. Like I can't get my head around that. And it's alchemy. It's pure alchemy. Like there's this amazing thing going on inside of the body where, you know, we put food in and it comes out as us, you know, and this is this idea of we are what we eat, literally, and we are what we digest. So if we're constantly drawing on our kidney fire, we're constantly drawing on it because we're constantly pouring cold things in, what tends to happen is that gets exhausted. And so then we'll get cold all over our bodies, which is a really common thing with vegans. We'll start to get kind of almost malnourished because our digestion is not functioning very well. They might grow like fuzz all over their bodies. They'll start to look exhausted. Their bones will start to get really weak. Their teeth will start to get really weak. All of those things come from the kidneys. So this is a really good example of how one thing happening at one organ system will affect something at another organ system. So the stomach is responsible for muscle mass. So a lot of vegans waste away. They can't put on muscle mass, right? And I mean, we live in Mullumm, like I see this all the time, where they're very scrawny and they can't put on any muscle mass, but they often have big tummies. And they're not fat tummies, they're like bloated kind of tummies. And then because their kidney yang is weak, they often will find that they have bone and teeth issues. So, you know, and we've had lots of friends go through this kind of stuff, and you can start to repair it, but it takes a lot. Like by the time you're at that point, it's bad. Like this is where you'd want to start getting into, you know, broths and collagen and, you know, deer antlers, one we would use a lot at this point, which is unfortunately an animal product for vegans. But, you know, it's like you've gone so far in one direction, it's now going to take something strong to bring you back.
Just the conundrum that I have there, you talk about cold foods, but your category of cold food is not that it's not cooked and hot when you eat it.
Correct, it's energetic. So if you looked into Chinese dietary therapy, which I can give you guys a link or two to put on the blog, but Chinese dietary therapy classifies foods as having, and not just in China, Ayurveda does this as well, as having different temperatures in terms of it's kind of like their digestive temperature, like what they do inside of the body. So you're having a lot of mung beans on an Ayurvedic diet. They're a cooling kind of a thing, and they're a little bit more neutral really, but they're a little bit more on the cooler side. But they're very good at drawing damp and water out of the body. And you were saying you felt like you've lost some water. And so it makes sense if you're having a lot of mung beans that's what they're doing. So it's imagining that we're using food as medicine now instead of as something just to satiate our cravings. And so we look at this from this kind of broader perspective of like basically fruits and vegetables in general. This is all generalizing, of course. If you study the nuance of this, it's complicated and beautiful, but as a generalization for a podcast, generally fruits and veggies, especially raw fruits and veggies, are cold in nature. So they're going to cool down your cauldron. So it's going to, when you add those things in, it's just going to, it's like putting wet leaves on a fire. It just goes out, you know? And so it creates smoke and heat, which rises typically. So, you know, sometimes people will have things like acne, or they'll have, you know, things like, you know, whether things are manifesting around their head, so like ear stuff, scalp stuff, eye stuff, you know, this is all, the mouth, you know, this is all coming from heat rising and being trapped in the upper burner is what it would be called in Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
But it's because you've created like a steam kind of hot situation over here. It's like, it's more like compost than it is like digestion. Yeah. Like a bad compost, like a stinky compost. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because if you think of your body as composting, it's like a little bit of dry stuff is required to make compost.
Get that heat.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to put in some like, you know, we're talking about potatoes, you know, you got to put in some stuff that can kind of act as a bit of a buffer to all that like rotting material, which is what fruit and veg is. So, you know, it's kind of, it's helpful. The compost analogy is a good one, I think. You know, it's like have a little bit of everything, you know, and don't just focus on one specific type of food. Yeah,
a good biodynamic compost, actually, in the morning you can see it steaming because it's well built, and so it has all the elements in it, and it creates quite a bit of heat. I mean, they won't burn, but you know, like it's warm. Yeah,
if you put your hand in there, it would be toasty.
That's right. Yeah. So and you have to go out of the vegan category to get there. Like most of the hot ones or the hot foods would be in the sort of dairy.
I think a cooked vegan diet is going to be better than a raw vegan diet. Again, short term you might feel fine. Longer term, I think cooked is more sustainable. And again, talking to a lot of vegans over my last sort of 5 or 6 years being front facing with our business, I've definitely heard that a lot of times, that they did okay on raw for a bit, but then they started eating cooked and they felt better. I think it's possible to do well if you're very, very, very careful, and I'd probably recommend working with someone who can guide you and create, you know, because you need to know your constitution, and I probably should have said this earlier, but the thing about Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and a lot of the original healing traditions is they respect each person's individuality, and that what works for one person won't work for someone else. And unfortunately, in our kind of modern time, that's not how we think about things. We think about there's one pill for this ill, you know, and it doesn't matter about the person taking it. It's just that this pill fixes this disease, you know. And so that's how Western medicine and biomedicine is built. And that's a really challenging mindset to slip out of, and instead come at it from, well, what's best for my body at this point in time, on this day, in this season, Wow. For example, you know, I don't drink beer in winter, I will drink beer in summer. I actually can digest it in summer, but if I have it in winter, it makes me cold, and it's kind of, you know, just doesn't work. So, you know, and that's cold Australian beer, not warm, weird English beer. But, you know, I think like that's just a really silly example of my personal limits. I never eat salad ever until it's like 100 degrees outside. And even then I will not eat a lot of it, you know, I'll eat like a handful of it. My body does not digest it well. Maybe as my spleen gets stronger after years of being vegetarian and, you know, living on juices and all these terrible things I did to myself, and, you know, eating disorders and all these things that create problems in the spleen, maybe after a period of time I'll be able to handle salads better. But for me right now, not so great. But for someone with a really hot constitution like my partner, he's better at salads than me. Like he can handle them much better than I can. For him, a raw diet was less of an issue than it was for me. For me, I felt cold all the time. You know, I felt kind of sickly. I never had enough energy. I kind of, needed a lot of external heat sources to keep me going. I like lived in my sauna, you know, and it was because my body doesn't handle that kind of thing. I have a colder constitution than he does. So if we look at things from this bio-individual perspective, then it becomes more about, you know, how do I best kind of know myself, and then what resources do I choose to access or support do I choose to get to best nourish me. Food, I think, you know, as close to nature as possible and prepared as minimally as possible with some kind of warming up is usually a good idea. You know, we do slow cooker things a lot because it's convenient with a busy family life. Porridges in the morning, either rice or oats. We do, you know, stews at night. We'll sometimes have pasta. You know, we just kind of eat whatever we feel like, but we don't eat crap. We rarely eat processed food. I think that, you know, if you can, there's the whole Michael Pollan thing, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, cooked would be my addition. And also like what your grandma recognized as food, you know, if it would have been on your grandma's table, it's a pretty good chance it's good for you to eat, you know, like they weren't eating Twinkies or, you know, whatever else American people eat these days.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what the Australian version are, Kit Kats, I don't know. But, you know, they were generally eating, you know, kind of meats, veggies, some probably fruit, maybe a bit of bread and dairy. Like, those things are pretty safe. Like, we've bastardized all these foods, but that's what humans have lived on forever, you know. It's just industrialization that's really created the problem. If you want to have a look at that, Michael Pollan's book, Cooked, which is all about the industrialization of wheat and other things, meat and all these other things, you know, it's just like what they put into like a tip-top loaf is just out of control. You know, and people just buy that and feed it to their kids thinking they're feeding them a healthy food because bread, you know, staff of life, all this kind of stuff. Like, give them bread and wine and fish, like that's Jesus. You know, it's become poison. So, you know, we need to go back to our roots. Real bread, real food, real pasta, etc. I can't read your writing upside down.
That's manual therapy.
Manual therapy. Yeah, look, I believe touch is super important. I don't think you necessarily need to have massage, but, you know, if you look at any of the healing traditions, again, they usually have a touch-based component. So there's usually massage or acupuncture or some kind of human-to-human kind of connection where another person is touching and nourishing you in a non-sexual way. And I think that's very important because from when we're babies, like being touched, like if you ever look up the science of being held by babies, like it's just incredible. It regulates their bodies, it regulates their biorhythms, it teaches them how to respond in different situations, it teaches them, you know, all this amazing stuff, how to self-regulate their hormones and everything. So, you know, as adults, we can benefit from the same kind of, it's kind of like, you know, exchange frequencies, you know, like if you go to a good healer who takes care of themselves and they put their hands on you and they take care of you, you'll benefit from that. So that's where a lot of that wisdom comes from. You can do it with your partner, you can do it with your children. You know, I try and massage my daughter when she lets me. You know, I just think it's important to remember, and you can do self-massage. Ayurveda talks about abhyanga, where you stroke oil into all of your body. And allow that to sit for a little while, and it kind of just helps to like lubricate the body and the joints, and it's an act of self-care and self-love. You know, we've made self-care all these, you know, bubble baths and going to the spa and whatever, but it's like, you know, touch your body and like love it, like respect it, you know, look at its scars and its stretch marks and its wounds and its fat bits and its skinny bits, and, you know, like honor it as this vessel that you're experiencing life through. You know, we kind of miss that. So that idea of this touch is super important.
That's really nice, by the way. I have sort of like a boat in mind, probably a spaceship, and when I look at, you know, I'm a bit into sci-fi and that type of thing, and you know, the veteran ships often have those scratches, and they look like they have a story to tell.
Battles, yeah.
That's right, yeah, and you know, if you look at your body that way, that's a great way of looking at it and just honoring it for what it has come through, rather than, oh, you're not shiny and new anymore, you know, but actually, you know, it does tell a story.
Yeah, and it's funny because I recently, just this morning, my mum sent me a picture of myself at, I think I must have been maybe 19 or 20. And I mean, I'm on paper, I look really pretty and I've got like my long hair and my baby face and, you know, I look like this. But I can see in my eyes, I look sad, you know, like, and that was really at the peak of my eating disorder and me kind of going through a lot of stuff emotionally. And I, you know, I was modeling, I had all this kind of stuff going on externally that people were validating my appearance, but inside I felt like shit, you know. And now when I'm probably, you know, a little bit more lined and had a baby and, you know, things have changed, I fucking rate my body so much more now than I did then. And like, you know, there's always that saying that, you know, youth is not appreciated by the youthful, you know, but I just, yeah, I really feel like the learning that I've experienced through this body and what it's taught me and what it's giving me to share with others has been so much more profound than what I could have got from, you know, a picture perfect model body that I maybe thought I needed to have at some point at that age, you know. And having my daughter and having a child that's a girl, you know, and thinking about her growing up and having that same relationship with her body just terrifies me. I think we have to lead from this place of, like, lead from example with our children where they see us embodied and they see us, like, appreciating and respecting our bodies and what we put into them and what we do with them, you know. And I understand, again, it's a complex kind of conversation, but I think, you know, we're so often mean to ourselves on a really, like, subconscious level, and so just to bring it into consciousness and to offer some respect and some gratitude, I think is really powerful. And then, you know, the kind of qigong or energy cultivation, I practice yoga for this, or walking, again, as I said, is super powerful, but I always use the analogy of the body being kind of like a glow stick, like you need to crack it a little bit to get it to light up,
Right.
And I don't literally mean like crack it,
Yes,
but I
yes.
mean like, it needs to move for the electrons and all the kind of photochemicals in your body to start to kick in. And every tradition, again, says movement is really important for healing. So you don't ever put a cast on a break in the ancient traditions because it's going to stagnate the energy, and the healing energy won't be able to get there. You would never put ice on a wound because it stagnates. And so again, it creates contraction when you want openness and you want inflammation and you want your body to, the body does stuff on purpose. Like, it's intelligent. It doesn't swell up for you to, like you were talking about giving painkillers to a fever, and it's like, well, then the fever goes away. But the fever is actually a part of the healing process, So it's like we often look at the symptom and try and suppress it instead of understanding why it's coming. So when we look at things like energy cultivation, that can be, I do things like, again, self-massage, so breast massage and jade eggs, which are kind of like a pelvic floor toning exercise for women. Men can do exercises with their testicles, they can do semen retention, there's all sorts of things men can do, but then just basic movements. All of us enjoy stretching, anything that opens up the joints. Yoga, the really old school yoga, is just all around just opening up the joints. It's just systematic opening of every joint in the body. It's very slow, it's very easy, it's very gentle. And then, ideally something that gets the heart rate going a little bit. So that's why walking is so powerful. And I think, people underestimate walking. One of the things I read before I was pregnant was that Indigenous women walked 5 kilometres a day on average while they were pregnant. And I said, okay, I'm going to walk 5 kilometres a day while I'm pregnant. And I mean, I don't want to say it was that, but I had such a fucking easy pregnancy and birth. And I often think, if I didn't do that, like, because it kept my pelvis open, it kept me kind of like quite strong, it kept my legs strong. So when I had to squat for like, 2 hours to have my baby, I was okay. I think it really helped to kind of keep my chi moving so that I was able to have a reasonably easy kind of time. There's obviously multiple factors, but I think we really underestimate. We used to have to walk for water, we used to have to walk for food, we used to have to walk, even to the corner store to get milk, and now it's like we get it delivered, or we drive to the front door of the shop and we walk in and we drive out again, so we hardly do anything for our food anymore. So I think just walk, that's a really good one. And then mindfulness, I mean, I personally practice meditation. I think it takes a little while to learn how to get your mind to shut up. But I think it's really good to start with something. There's lots of apps these days that you can download for free and that teach you how to at least be still for a couple of minutes. And I would recommend, 2 minutes a day is better than 20 minutes a day if you're going to do it. I don't care how long it is, as long as you do something. I would highly recommend looking into Yoga Nidra. In terms of a lead practice, you can get free apps again on your iPhone. You plug in your earphones, and it's basically like, it's called yoga sleep. That's kind of what it translates to. And it's this idea that you're in this liminal space between consciousness and sleep, and it's where we can kind of really capture that kind of subtle energy that we've been talking about and transform it and, again, alchemize it for kind of self-healing. So they say that 3 hours of sleep is equivalent to 1 hour of yoga nidra. So it's kind of like a hack that the yogis came up with. Biohack. For like, when they couldn't sleep because they were doing intense meditations, because they would do a lot of crazy stuff. So they would use it as kind of like a buffer and to help their body. But it's used to kind of manifest. So if you're feeling like you need to, bring something forth, it can be a way of kind of reprogramming your subconscious. So a lot of these things, that's what is really interesting when you go beyond the thinking mind, is there's different layers of this. And in yoga, it's called, so it's going to get complicated, yoga philosophy, here we go. So yoga says that we have a personality that we identify with, and that it's not really real. It's just a construct. It's been created by our culture, by our families, by our response to things. And it says that when we start to meditate, we start to go beyond that. And in that process, lots of things will come up which can be quite uncomfortable to deal with. They're called vrittis, and they arise within our field of consciousness. And they can be just unpleasant memories, they can be emotions, they can be all sorts of stuff. And again, if we look at it through the lens of both Taoism and yoga, we can imagine that those things that we've been sort of repressing or trapping in our bodies are starting to emerge once they've got the space. So when we start to have these things coming out, that's what happens in meditation. So a lot of people sit still and they're like, oh my God, I'm going insane. I'm thinking about... I remember one time going to Vipassana and Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill played in my head for like 3 hours. And I was like, I'm here to meditate. Why am I listening to this?
Yeah.
But it's because my brain, for whatever reason, when given some space, decided that was what it was going to throw at me. That was my vritti of the day, you know. And then sometimes it's like really like intense stuff, and other times it's like weird stuff. So that's part of it. You just go through that weird bit. So if you're meditating and weird shit's happening, that's just normal. And then as you start to learn to calm your mind and things, it's like going beneath the waves. So I always talk about like you've got the surface of the ocean, it's really choppy, but you dive underneath and it's really quiet and it's really still. And it's like you still know there's stuff going on up there. You can kind of hear it and you can see it, but you're underneath it all. And that's what happens when you meditate. The thoughts keep flowing. They're coming, they're going, they're around. It's like the up there, but you're in a different place. And that's when we kind of start to be in another realm, you know, and the yogis talk about physical, astral, causal, and, you know, different states of meditation accessing different realms. So we're looking to kind of, you know, mindfulness is just like paying attention to the small things and being present for our lives and all of this stuff. And that's a really important place to start because there's so much in that, you know, it's such a rich place to explore. But when we really learn to meditate, and this is what the Taoists and the yogis were both pointing to, is we actually start to, we can reconnect our spirit to our body. We can remember our spirit. And what most of us, this is, you know, in, again, the Bible, yoga, Taoism, we've forgotten ourselves. We've been born into this world, and as we age, we forget. We forget that we were spirit once. We forget that we were, you know, not confined in a physical form. We forget. And so this active remembering is what these practices are about. And it's not about disassociating with the body. It's about reuniting these things. So this idea of union or oneness. And it's not oneness with spirit. It's oneness with ourselves as spirit. So we're not leaving anywhere. We're not off the planet and in outer space or any of that stuff. And that can happen. You can go into outer space, but you'll come back. And so this is where, you know, like we start with meditation as this idea of stilling our mind, but really the mind is a part of this life. You know, it's a part of being human, and we don't want to shut it off. We don't want to turn it off. We just want to remember that we aren't it. So it's thinking right now, you know, I'm Tahnee, I'm on a podcast, I'm talking about this, and I identify with myself as someone who understands some of these principles around But I know that beneath that is I'm not any of those things, you know. And if I try and identify myself with those things, I'm going to be very unhappy because I can never actually be those things because I'm not those things. They're just things, you know. So, and you know, these are kind of complex spiritual ideas, but my experience with them has been that that poignancy I talked about right at the beginning when I was saying that bittersweet kind of appreciation of life, where you start to realize that we're all in this journey together, that everybody is fucking forgetting why they're here all the time. You know, we're all kind of struggling along, and at the heart of it all, like we're all these beautiful beings that are like on the same path. It's just we're all at kind of different levels of it. And I had a great teacher who used to describe it as, you know, climbing mountains. And it's like, I'm looking across at your mountain and you're like a little bit further up the side, but your mountain's different to my mountain, you know? So what you need to get up your mountain is different to what I need to get up my mountain. But you might have been like, oh, I just crossed a crevice before and I use this tool, you know? And so we can all share kind of ideas with each other, but to try and like be on anyone else's mountain, you're just going to slide back down to the bottom and have to start again, I think. But yeah. So.
Oh, great. That's a great analogy. Yeah. No, great. And, you know, I talked to your partner, Mason, about that, you know, pursuing the shiny objects. You know, it might be not your shiny object, might be not what you actually really yearn for, but it's more like, well, then I can Instagram it. You know, if I do this thing, I can Instagram it, and that looks really good. So I should do that if you really stop and think about, like, what do I feel like really doing, or what is it that I yearn for? That might be quite a different story and might be not Instagram worthy in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And like, how many of us just identify with what we post or what we share, or
that's powerful.
You know, I mean, I know so many people I talk to that are like, they're so different to, you know, I met this Instagram famous person, they're so different to what they share, and I'm like, how are we forgetting that this is a curated thing where people only pick the things that they want you to see, you
Yeah,
know? Like,
yeah.
it's like going to dinner with a narcissist. It's like, it's not fun. You don't want to talk about someone's best version of themselves all night. You want a human connection, you know? And I want to know what upsets you or what, you know, keeps you up at night. I want to know the good and the bad. Like, that's what a friendship and a relationship is. I don't want to just be, you know, you think about raising a child, you just want them to be happy little, like, quiet sunshine babies in the corner. Like, yes, obviously that's nice when they're like that, but you know, I want to be there for all of it. I want to, you know, I want her to have a full human experience and to grow through all of these things and to become a strong woman. And she needs some of that fire and, you know, some strife to get there. And I think, you know, we've just become so sanitized from struggle. You know, people don't want things to be difficult. They don't want to work for anything. They don't want to, you know, they want to get famous on Instagram and get given stuff by companies. And, you know, I've met people like more in LA than here, thank God. But that's literally their life goal, you know. I just want to become Insta famous. When did that become a thing? You know, but it's a thing. So that's cool. Yeah. But I think, you know, my perspective, I suppose, and I'm a big fan of Seth Godin, and I know he's not really a yogi, but I feel like a lot of his work is very spiritual. It's around, you know, this idea of make better things to make things better. You know, like if you're going to do something with your life, do something useful. Like, and it might be just contribute to an awesome company, or it might be, you know, make sure your family are fed every day. Like, it doesn't have to be this grand thing. Like, I don't care what your purpose is. Like, yoga talks about dharma, and it's like a fisherman's dharma is to catch fish. You know, that's all it is. Like, and that's a spiritual path. You know, and do not discount that. You know, the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's job is to kill his uncles and his cousins because they're representing the forces of the mind that are holding him back from his potential. You know, it's an allegory, it's not real, but it's this idea that you have to go in and actually, you know, this is a spiritual text telling you to go and kill things, you know, like quite literally. And it's like, you know, these are things we have to, you know, remember that part of our growth process is like, you know, things get tough. We have to constantly keep showing up for the things we believe to be important. And, you know, we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to have this picture perfect Instagram life. We just need to be, you know, really clear with ourselves about what we need and what's important and what's relevant. So, yeah, that's, I think, so much of what I've learned is like, no one else is going to give it to me. I have to work it out for myself. I can have friends and I can talk to people and I can pay people to listen to me and, you know, all of this stuff. And that's all been very helpful. I respect all of those things. But most of what I know has come through like me, you know, and it's just a law that I've found to be true over and over again, you know. So
great, thanks for that. That was fantastic. Well, we actually have 3 questions that we finish off the podcast with.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, you can keep them short. There are 3. I just give the first 2, and there's this small distinction between it. So one is, what are your 3 favorite things that gets you out of bed every morning? And then, what's your thing at the moment that you really enjoy the most? So the first question would be just like, you know, what drives, like, what gives you joy to say like, I want to actually get out of bed?
Okay. So getting out of bed is my daughter. She's really cute in the morning. So I really like, you know, I spend mornings with her. My partner practices, so I really appreciate our time together. We kind of usually have something fun that we're doing. At the moment it's baking chocolate cakes.
Fantastic.
It's her birthday in a month. She's milking it. And then I feel like I've always been motivated by trying to contribute in some way, like to make people's lives better and everyone's, like animals, you know. I feel like we're all responsible to some degree for the planet we live on and the society we live in. So I think that's always motivated me. And I really just like getting up. I can't think of a third one. I feel like getting out of bed is just a privilege, you know, like I have a body and a mind and I'm able to use it and I have like this forum to express it. Like I feel very fortunate. Like, you know, I remember getting out of bed years ago and not feeling like that, you know, probably at least 10, 15 years ago. But, you know, it's like I feel really like willing and capacitated at this point. So, yeah, so that's probably, and, you know, in terms of what's really like lighting me up, I think, you know, I'm always pretty inspired by like the people we connect with and how such simple concepts can have such a profound effect on people. Like we've got a channel on Slack in our company called Awesome Feedback, and you know, everyone in our team, anytime they receive awesome feedback, they post it on there, and it's kind of like a, you know, just a great place to jump in and remember why you love doing what you do, you know. And with yoga as well, like I've been teaching again like consistently. I was teaching on teacher trainings and kind of dribs and drabs, but I've been doing a weekly class now for about 2 months, and just watching people learn to relax and this guy's like falling asleep, and I'm like, that's such a privilege that someone is willing in an hour to fall asleep in front of you.
Yeah.
And like, that to me is just so inspiring, that someone who's a tradesman who spends all day in the sun flogging himself will come to a yoga class with a girl, lie down on a squishy pillow and have a nap, like that just blows my mind. So, I find those kinds of things really inspiring, like people's vulnerability and I think people inspire me, I suppose, is probably the easiest way to do that.
Yeah. And then I have a third question. Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So, if you think about existence, why do you think that you exist and why human exists? Like, what's your sort of construct or knowledge that you have of why we actually exist?
Do you ask everyone this question?
It's very interesting.
That's a great question. Okay. Well, I'm a yogi, so I believe their lens, or my lens, I suppose, only because I feel like I've verified it through my practice. So the idea is there's a source of consciousness that I don't get, but the human bit I get. So we want to express, or why do we have a business, right? Because we want to challenge ourselves and learn and grow, right? So why have a human experience? Because consciousness wants to try something different. It wants to have a play. I think of it as like Super Mario. Like, it's tough. There's like some bosses that are really hard to beat. You get to grow up a bit and shrink down a bit, and there's a whole thing going on. Like, consciousness is playing with itself. It's a game. It's a great cosmic game, and we are like waves in an ocean, or like those cool metal things where you lift the magnet and all the little fingers come up.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I don't know what they're called, like on desks in offices all around the world. But this idea that if there's a flat surface and then we each arise as a wave, that's each individual human, and we operate on a multidimensional level. I completely believe this, and what happens in the physical plane is that we're most able to, it's like imagining, you start business with little knowledge. As you live in the human form, you accumulate knowledge fastest, because if you exist in an astral realm, in an energy realm, you're formless. It's very difficult to kind of hold on to things. But if you're in this physical body and everything's kind of tangible and slower, it's like you can really condense and learn. And so I think we go through these cycles of human existence, and I believe we have many of them, in order that we can become, we can experience ourselves as consciousness and remember ourselves, and also expand consciousness, because I believe we're all contributing to the pulse of the universe, and I think that's part of where the energy of the universe generates from, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of a simple way of explaining a complex idea.
Great. Yeah. I heard this actually. Yeah, I heard that from Abraham actually, that the definition of an eternity is expansion. And expansion can only happen if you actually interact as consciousness with things and try out new things, in a sense, right? And
expansion can only happen with some contraction, right? Like, I mean, my experience in meditation and on plant medicine, so two different experiences, was that there is this pulse that is like the heartbeat of the universe, and that energy is constantly expanding and contracting. So it's not an infinite universe or a finite universe, it's both. It's coexisting as both. And we are similarly a part of that, and we are simultaneously experiencing that, but we just don't know it because we're condensed.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, you don't need to know that as a condensed form. You can get, and that if we become aware of that, then we can use this life as, because what happens as a human, if you can, I don't like the word progress, but it's the only word I can think of right now. If you can progress enough to become super conscious, then you can heal other people. And, so one of my teacher's teacher, he was a healer. People would come to him, and he would be able to travel into the spiritual realms and even into the causal realms, the realms of like the great God beings. And he'd be able to negotiate with them on different health matters and assist people and heal them in this physical realm. And he developed the consciousness to be able to do that, where he could do that with control and without needing all of his jing. Because what happens when you do too much plant medicine, or even too much kind of like really stimulating meditation, is that if you don't have a reservoir of energy. That's why energy cultivation is so important in Taoism and yoga. If you don't have a strong reservoir of energy and you try and shoot yourself out into the space, you know, you need a lot of energy to come back, right?
Yes.
To go to the moon, you need to have just as much fuel to come home. Actually more, because you kind of got to push through the atmosphere and everything, right? So it's kind of the same with us. If we're going to keep shooting it, and you've met spiritual people, right, that are total loonies after 20 or 30 years because they've lost their capacity to keep coming back and grounding back and returning. And so we run out of energy. And so this is why the herbs and all of these factors are so important. Diet, everything, community. It's like these things that ground us, that help us build energy, strengthen our energy. And then we practice these higher realms of consciousness. So I think, you know, my visceral experience is of duality, is of yin and yang, is of, you know, black and white, of the pulse, the contraction, the expansion. It's not just one or the other. And I think that to me is the closest I've come to any kind of understanding of what's going on. Awesome.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Fantastic. I look forward to this second set of questions, which I have. I have 3 more if we come back.
Okay.
So,
There's a carrot that you dangled.
Yeah, that's
Ooh la
right.
la.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
My
that was
pleasure.
awesome. I had so many other things that I wanted to ask you, but that was so dense and amazing to actually get the download on a great framework that, you know, really help people to figure out more and go onto a path of, I guess, you know, becoming more sovereign towards their health and, you know, feeling comfortable to actually taking charge of their health, because as you said, you know, it's probably the only way we can do it, really.
Yeah, I think it all starts at home, and then we can offer our services to others. So hopefully there's some offerings there for others.
Yeah, lots. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Lots of love.
Thanks, Sebastian.